Most days, the world moves fast, but the moments that change me, they arrive as a small tap on the shoulder. Tonight, 10 tiny gestures, quiet, ordinary, deeply human, shifted the weight of my day. A grocery line that rearranged itself, a backpack with a name that found its way home, a librarian who trusted more than a policy. Breathe with me. Story 1. Story 1. The grocery line switch. Compassion is sometimes just math done with a different variable. The store hummed in that late afternoon key when everyone shops like they're solving a riddle. What can I make? Fast. That tastes like an apology. I stood in a line that moved the way glaciers practice, watching the loop of rotisserie chickens go by like tan planets. My basket held practical hope. Pasta, lemons, a bag of salad that promised far more than leaves can legally promise. I was sixth. Ahead of me, a man stacked his conveyor with bulk items that looked like a warehouse had sneezed. Flat of water, pack of paper towels, an optimism of protein bars. Behind me, a woman rocked a stroller with one foot and kept the peace with the ancient art of snacks. The baby negotiated terms at a volume reserved for diplomats and toddlers. The express lane flashed 15 items or fewer, in a tone that always feels judgy. A teenager with a headset did the cheerful triage of modern retail. Next in line, please. Audrey can take you on 3. We all pretended the system would favor us. Then the loudspeaker. Price, check on. The sentence trailed off into purgatory. Our line stiffened. Everyone did that small, collective exhale you only hear in grocery stores and waiting rooms. That's when the woman in front of me, gray sweater, sturdy shoes, hair in a bun that meant business, turned and actually looked at us. Not the way people scan for competition, but the way you read a room. She saw the stroller, the baby, the slow-moving conveyor history unfolding. She tapped the man with the warehouse sneeze and said, "You go after me, and you," to the mother, "go before both of us." A quick reordering, a tiny democracy. The man blinked, like he had been gently startled by fairness. "Oh, I'm fine," he said. Doing the politeness dance, she shook her head. "He's not." She nodded at the baby. The baby, sensing a platform, gurgled a speech. The mother did the, "Are you sure?" routine. "Yes," Gray Sweater insisted. "We'll all get out faster." It was almost true. It was also beside the point. I helped move the stroller past my cart, acting as traffic cop with the authority of a person who has none. The cashier, Audrey, caught what was happening and lifted the lane divider like a baton. "We love a parade," she said, which is the kind of sentence that can redeem an errand. Items beeped. The baby accepted a tiny box of raisins as if it were a medal. The mother mouthed 3 thank yous. One at the sweater, one at me, one at the air. The sweater shrugged in a way that made me suspect she had led 1,000 such small revolutions. When it was her turn, her groceries were few and specific. Milk, bread, a bouquet of daisies that looked like a small apology she was planning to deliver to someone, maybe herself. She paid in cash with the exactness of someone who respects receipts. The bagger, kid with hair doing brave things, tucked the daisies on top like a crown. As the warehouse man moved up, I noticed a detail that made the room widen. He wore a shirt with a logo from a local shelter. The name tag said Cam. The bulk items were not a sneeze. They were a supply run. "Big delivery?" I asked, to say something that wasn't, "How long have we been here?" He grinned. "Bigger now," he said, nodding toward the daisies woman and the stroller. "We feed whoever's hungry," Audrey's scanner sang. The conveyor bit its lip. Cam swiped a store card with the ease of a person who knows all the hacks. We get the discount, he said. We still act grateful. He paid with a shelter card and the sort of smile that is not for show. The line behind us had relaxed, the way lines do when they are given permission to be human. My turn. Pasta, lemons, the overpromised salad. I added a pack of granola bars and handed it to Cam before he left. For the road, I said, aiming for casual and hitting awkward. He didn't make me regret it. Thanks, he said, like he meant it. Then to Audrey, you guys okay on boxes? She pointed at a stack. We're swimming. As the receipt printed, the sweater woman turned at the end of the lane and lifted her daisies at us like a toast. I lifted my lemons back, which is a sentence I did not expect to write about myself. The baby, high on raisins and victory, waved something sticky that may once have been a toy. On the way out, I bumped into the stroller by the automatic doors, and the mother laughed the laugh of someone who survived a small war. That was kind, she said, meaning the sweater woman, meaning all of it. I've been that baby emotionally this week. Me too, I said. And we stood there for a second in the fake wind the doors make, understanding each other in a simple, exhausted way. In the parking lot, Cam loaded the flat of water like a person who respects both gravity and mission. I asked which shelter. He told me. We're between donations, he said, not as a pitch, just as fact. I handed him the granola again, because I had chickened out inside and put them in my bag. He laughed. We're always between and always okay, he said. People fill the gaps, like that line in there. He gestured toward the sliding doors. That was good math. Now, when a line slows, I watch for who needs to be moved forward. Not just to speed things up, but to say we see you. It takes almost no time to let someone go ahead. It takes almost no courage to suggest a reordering. I learned that day, you can change the vibe of a room with a sentence like, "You go before me." It isn't a sacrifice if it's the story you want to tell later. I think about the daisies woman when I set groceries on my counter. I picture her handing the flowers to someone who needed them, or putting them in a jar on her own kitchen table and deciding to be softer with herself. I think about the baby's serious face as the world arranged itself in his favor for 5 minutes. I think about Cam's cart, full of bulk generosity, and how systems are made of moments like that, just multiplied. Compassion is sometimes just math done with a different variable. That day, we changed the order of operations. Everybody passed through a little lighter. The daisies made it home. Story 2, the backpack with a name. The city always has a lost and found. Sometimes it's you. I saw the backpack sitting upright on a bench like it had chosen the spot. Blue canvas, frayed strap, personality. People were doing their afternoon choreography. Runners with earbuds, a kid on a scooter humming a private anthem, an older couple holding hands, the way some people hold promises. The backpack waited. The owner, presumably, had not. I sat on the far end of the bench, doing that polite, exaggerated, not touching you do when faced with a stranger's belongings. The park breeze ruffled the zipper like an eyelid about to open. I considered the ethics. Leave it and hope. Call it in and risk paperwork. Peek for a name and risk knowing too much. Curiosity won, but gently. I leaned, not opening, just tilting the front pocket. A library card flashed from a clear sleeve, like a little lighthouse. Jonah R., with a number and a branch. Bless librarians and their instincts. I put the pocket back exactly as it had been, sat upright like a guilty middle schooler, and considered next moves. A woman walking a dog noticed my moral dilemma. Lost? She asked. I nodded at the backpack like it might answer. "Library card," I said. She grinned. "Librarians are the true mayors." She checked her watch. "I'm headed past the branch. Want me to take it?" She looked trustworthy in the way dog people often do. Leash in one hand, civic responsibility in the other. "Let's walk it together," I said, because the idea felt like a small procession. We carried the backpack between us, two normal people acting like a pit crew for a bag. At the desk, the librarian, badge reading Mrs. Daly, looked up with the kind of attention that makes you think you have arrived in the right chapter. "We have a Jonah," she said, after one glance at the card, with the confidence of an archivist. "He's 12. He built our best paper tower at STEM night." She dialed a number, the ringtone equivalent of "come home." While we waited, Mrs. Daly did what librarians do best. She gathered context. She opened the main pouch with respectful authority. Inside, a math workbook thick with effort, a comic folded to the page where heroes question their calling, a half-eaten granola bar of questionable lineage, and a note that simply said, "Remember Saks after school." She shut the zipper and patted the bag like you pat a person who has had a day. Jonah's mom arrived in the kind of hurry that still knows to say thank you while moving. Jonah, red-cheeked, trailed, saxophone case knocking his knees, blame and relief doing an awkward dance on his face. "We realized at the bus stop," his mom said, short of breath. "He thought he'd put it on and then did not." Jonah looked at the floor the way only preteens can, like it has betrayed them. "It's all here," Mrs. Daly said, setting the backpack on the counter like a reunited pet. Jonah hugged it, and then seemed mortified by his own affection for canvas. "Thank you," he said, directly at us, and then, in the direction of the dog, "Also, your dog is perfect." The dog, who had been lobbying for this compliment all along, wagged like a small boat. We did the "it was nothing" loop, which is the ritual around small kindnesses. It is never nothing to a kid who thought he lost the week. "You saved my history notebook," he confessed. "It has my Civil War diorama plan." His mom made the face all parents make when a project is mentioned that no adult in the household has yet heard of. "Due Friday?" she asked. He nodded. I backed away, as if from a live wire. On our way out, Mrs. Daly slipped a bookmark into my hand. "Libraries, because people need places where gifts aren't transactions." I put it in my pocket, like a talisman. The dog woman and I walked back through the park lighter by one worry and heavier by one good story. 2 days later, I returned to the branch with a bag of gently used books and left them for the book sale that funds teen programs. Mrs. Daly recognized me with the psychic power librarians have. "Jonah brought cookies," she said, like a headline. "He wanted to say thank you, but his Saks lesson aligned with the space-time continuum this time." She slid a note across the counter in careful 12-year-old handwriting. "Thank you for finding me. I mean my backpack. I'm building Gettysburg out of cereal boxes." There was a drawing of a tiny cannon that meant business. Now I look for names in ways that respect privacy and rescue property. I carry a strip of masking tape in my wallet. If I see a water bottle or lunchbox without a name at the park, I leave a discreet square taped inside with "Name me." Sometimes the universe wants to reunite things. It just needs a librarian to officiate. The backpack with a name taught me that lost and found is a community sport. The bench, the dog walker, the librarian, the kid with the sacks, all of us part of a geography in which objects and people make their way back to where they belong. It wasn't heroic. It was a small procession to a desk that knows 1,000 ways to say welcome back. Story 3. The librarian's rain check. Policies keep the doors open. Grace invites you to come inside anyway. It rained the way cities apologize. Hard and sudden and slightly theatrical. I arrived at the library carrying 3 books that had been due yesterday. The kind of mistake that feels like a character flaw when you're the sort of person who alphabetizes spices. The foyer smelled like warm paper, umbrellas deciding their fate, and old radiators telling stories. At the desk was a man with the posture of someone who had slept badly and an umbrella that had given up early. He slid a stack of DVDs toward the clerk and said, "Braced, I know they're late." The clerk, badge, reading Sarah, did the thing that separates librarians from mere mortals. She listened like she was already on your side. She clicked a few gentle keys. "You're at 3 days," she said. He winced. "Rough week." She lowered her voice. "Me too. Let's waive today's. Bring them back on time next round." He blinked, recalibrating from confrontation to kindness. "I can do that," he said, like a promise. "My turn. I confessed to yesterday." "We'll call it weather," Sarah said, smiling in a way that felt like an umbrella from the inside. She checked in my books and slid me a printed receipt that looked suspiciously like mercy. "Any holds for you," she added, and the printer spat out a slip that said my name and a title I'd been chasing, a field guide to everyday consolations. The timing was rude and perfect. On the way to pick it up, I passed the children's room, where a storm of tiny coats had landed on low hooks, and a woman with a guitar was teaching a song about cows that knew far too much about vowels. Near the window, a teenager sat with a stack of SAT prep books, arranged like fortifications, and a cup of something hot contraband, but tolerated. A sign on the wall read, "No food, except kindness," in a hand that might have been Sarah's. I found my hold on the shelf, tucked between a gardening book with cheerful lies about basil, and a novel that had won a prize for making its readers cry sophisticated tears. On a whim, I wrote a thank you on the little comment card near the copier. For the rain check on the late fee, I'll pay it forward by shelving reshelved books back where they go. I tucked it into the suggestion box and felt like I had put a note in a bottle and thrown it into a very organized sea. On my way out, a woman with a stroller wrestled the door and lost. I held it. We did the dance of no, you first, absolutely, you first. And then we both laughed because we were both wet and both human. She said, "I came for a printer in a minute of not being alone." The library provided both. A week later, the sun remembered us. I went back with a bag for the book sale and saw a new sign at the desk. Amnesty Day Friday. Bring your late items. Bring yourself. Sarah waved me over like she had saved a story. "We got a donation," she said, "to cover late fees for the month. A regular who says this place saved him when his apartment was too quiet." She tapped the counter. "He wanted a way to say, 'You're welcome here.'" People came in all day with armloads of regret bound in hardcover. One man returned a book that had lived under his bed for a presidential administration. A kid brought back graphic novels with the sheepish pride of a cat that has not quite killed a mouse. A woman laid a cookbook down, like a confession. Sarah stamped and smiled and said, "Nailed it," as if returning a book were the same as finishing a marathon. There are rules for good reasons. Budgets, fairness, the logic that keeps librarians sleeping at night. And then there are days when Grace walks in and asks the rules to take a seat and let the room breathe. Watching that Amnesty Day felt like watching a town remember itself. Near closing, a man hovered by the reference desk, clearly rehearsing a question. I need to scan a letter," he said. "I don't know how letters work anymore." The reference librarian, tie with small rockets on it, said, "Walk with me." They scanned, they emailed, they high-fived. The man left taller. As I checked out my news stack, Sarah slid something across the counter, my comment card, with a reply. "We saw this. We always see this. Thanks for seeing us too." I tucked it into my field guide as a pressed leaf. Now, when I'm late on something more fragile than a book, an apology, a reply, a promise, I remember that afternoon and how a librarian decided that weather and humanity were sufficient causes to edit reality. I try to offer rain checks where I can. To a friend who needs a deadline, moved. To myself, when a day doesn't do what we agreed. To strangers who knock on doors while wrestling strollers and dignity. Policies keep the doors open. Grace invites you to come inside anyway. The library taught me I am allowed to be both a person who respects the sign and a person who, when it's raining, is welcomed in with a smile that says, "We'll figure it out." I return the books on time the next cycle, not because I feared a fee, but because I wanted to honor the mercy I'd been given. And when the sky forgets itself and opens again, I walk to the library just to stand under the awning for a minute and watch the doors slide open and close. A mechanical heartbeat that says, "Come in, you're home." Story 4. The Crosswalk Conductor. Some afternoons are held together by a neon vest and a whistle used sparingly. 3 blocks from my apartment, the elementary school empties itself like a tide going gentle. On Fridays, the crosswalk becomes a small republic. Scooters arguing with sidewalks, backpacks wider than shoulders, adults relearning patience. The conductor of this democracy is Ms. Ruth. Neon vest, white gloves, a hat that could stop weather. She doesn't blow the whistle so much as let it think about its responsibilities. I met her the week I started leaving for work, later than my best self approved of. I'd cut it too close, then stand, chastened, at her curb until she lifted her sign and parted the traffic like an aunt parting cake. "Eyes up," she'd say, to no one and everyone. Feet steady, we crossed together. On a particular Friday, wind tossed leaves around as if they were auditioning for a musical. A delivery van idled where it should not. A cyclist threaded a needle that did not exist, and an impatient driver tapped their steering wheel like percussion could bend laws. Ms. Ruth absorbed all of it into her quiet choreography. Then came the almost, always sudden, always instructional. A little boy, late and frantic, burst from the far corner, eyes on the school, not the street. A car rolled a right turn, as if physics owed it a favor. Ms. Ruth stepped forward, one palm up to the driver, the other arm out. A stop sign written in bone. The car halted so completely you could hear its apology. The boy, startled back into his body, looked up at her as if she were a lighthouse that spoke. "We walk like we mean it," she said, softer than the whistle. He nodded and, recalibrated, crossed in cadence with her stride. In the wake of almost, the crosswalk breathed out. The driver mouthed sorry. The cyclist lifted 2 fingers in the international sign of my bad. The boy kept walking and, halfway across, slipped his hand into his sister's, like a sentence finding its verb. Miss Ruth didn't smile. She returned to the center, planted her feet, and waited for the next small salvation. A block away, the bakery kept time in sugar. I bought 2 croissants, one for me and one for someone who'd earned it more. I returned to the corner and waited until the tide recessed. "Ma'am," I said, in the tone you use when you're about to hand someone flaky gratitude. She shook her head like she was about to refuse a medal. I offered anyway. She took it, and the reheated afternoon became briefly holy. "You see a lot," I said. "I see enough," she answered. "Enough to know we're all better when we look where we're going and also where each other are." As fall leaned toward winter, I learned her watchfulness had extras. She knew which grandfather forgot his cane, but never his jokes, which mom carried a second lunch for the kid who'd claim he forgot theirs, which teacher had a laugh that could bounce across the street and calm a week. When the first snow arrived, mean and early, she salted the curb before the city did, muttering to it like you mutter to a stubborn friend. Cars came and went, but the corner belonged to her, a small square of world where courtesy got right of way. One morning, I found her hat hanging on the sign, but no Miss Ruth. Panic can be unreasonable and devoted. I felt both. Then she appeared from the school door, arm linked with a grandmother I'd seen before, moving slowly. "Ice," she said, as explanation an enemy. She got the grandmother to the far curb and passed her, gently, efficiently, to a waiting neighbor as if people were relay batons and care the race. I started leaving earlier, just to stand a minute longer and watch the competence that asks nothing but the right to keep people intact. On days when the wind bullied the sign, I tried to be extra polite to strangers. On days when cars behaved like solos in a band, I imagined Miss Ruth's palm held up for me somewhere, reminding me to watch my corners. Spring brought the particular chaos of triumph. Graduation posters in windows, kids taller by audacity, the whole city rehearsing, being outside again. On the last Friday of the school year, I brought flowers that understood they were a chorus, not the star. I waited for a lull and handed them over. She looked almost shy. "Your corner kept me going this year," I said, truth trying not to wobble. "You kept the corner," she corrected. "We kept it together." I learned her name at the end of everything, when the tide turned summer and the crosswalk went quiet in the mornings. "Ruth," she said, then added, "Some days I feel like a conductor, some days a bouncer, every day a neighbor." She pointed her sign toward the ground, like a staff placed in its stand. "See you in September," she said, as if we were old friends, and not strangers, cohering for a few minutes each day around painted lines. Now, when I cross anywhere, I hear her, eyes up, feet steady. We cross together. I slow before the line, whether I'm the walker or the wheel. I offer my palm to impatience, mine, yours, the world's, and imagine a neon vest on my better angels. The whistle rarely needs to blow. We know how to act when someone reminds us with authority and kindness. The crosswalk isn't just paint, it's a promise. Some afternoons, a woman in a vest keeps it for all of us. Story 5. The Borrowed Battery Pack. Salvation at 3% battery is mostly logistics. The rest is manners. I was early for a meeting that would decide whether my project lived or learned to be humble. Early is my superstition. The cafe was full of laptops doing their taxes and people pretending their playlists were personality. I sat by an outlet that 1,000 chargers had already resented. My phone, traitor, showed 3%, the red sliver of doom. My cable, home, doing nothing productive. The barista, saintly but pragmatic, pointed to a small wooden box labeled Community Chargers, Take, Return, Be Nice. Inside, a tangle that looked like a drawer had panicked. No USB-C. Of course, I changed tables to be nearer to despair, Need see? A voice asked. The woman at the next table held up a battery pack the size of a generous cookie, already sprouting 3 cables, like benevolent snakes. I collect adapters the way other people collect stamps. She smiled, not smug, just prepared. I nodded with a gratitude that came out as a small, helpless sound. She slid it over as if passing salt. I'll be here an hour. Borrow freely. I plugged in and felt the modern equivalent of oxygen. The little lightning icon winked as if it knew what it was doing to my nervous system. I'll guard your immortality, I said, gesturing at the pack. She shrugged. If you run off with it, I get a story. But don't run off with it. We agreed to this social contract, like adults. While the phone drank, we performed the quiet choreography of strangers sharing a table. Nod when the barista spells your name creatively. Make room for a laptop to exhale. Ignore each other's email faces. The battery pack glowed a quartet of blue dots that made me feel irrationally, like I was doing more with my life. My meeting arrived. 2 people who wore competence, like a fitted jacket. We needed a video call. Of course we did. I looked at the percentage and did math I didn't like. Take the whole thing, the woman said, reading my face with the precision of an agnostic psychic. I'll sit close. You can't leave without passing me. It was a joke and a safety. I plugged the pack into the middle of the table like a tiny generator for my ambitions, and we talked. At some point, I looked over and noticed she'd rearranged her own needs, moved to a seat that put her out of reach of the cafe's only outlet, so my call could avoid an awkward tug-of-war. She was annotating a PDF with the focus of someone correcting a map. We rode parallel trains toward our separate destinations on the same table track. The meeting went kinder than I'd predicted. There were action items instead of autopsies. We scheduled a follow-up in a tone that meant we're not lying. I hit leave and felt my shoulders remember a way to relax that hadn't recently occurred to them. I turned to hand back the pack. You saved my day, I said, about as earnestly as a person can in public without startling others. We saved your battery, she corrected. You saved your day. We laughed. I asked what she was working on. Grant application, she said, making a face that mixed hope with paperwork. Books for the Saturday reading circle. She gestured toward a flyer. Kids on a rug, a volunteer reading. The kind of picture that made you remember your own favorite librarian's voice. We're short on 10 copies of the same book, she said. So I'm advocating for fewer, plus a projector. She shrugged. You know, logistics disguised as magic. I bought us both second coffees as a thank you that wouldn't interfere with her taxes. We traded tiny biographies, the portable kind you can fold back up. She worked at a community center, used battery packs like friendship bracelets, liked playlists without words when she wrote. I told her I was trying to become a person who carries 2 of something useful. A pen, a mask, a piece of gum, a little kindness. When she packed up, I felt the small ache of a good scene ending. Keep it, she said suddenly, tapping the battery. I protested with such vigor, a gymnast would have been proud. I have another in my bag, she confessed. I hoard backups. It's my flaw. I refused again. She rolled her eyes at my earnestness and made me a deal. I'll give you a link to the exact one. You buy it tonight. Meanwhile, take this. Return the kindness when you trip over someone else's red sliver. So, we did it her way. That night, I ordered 2. One for me, one to lend on purpose. I labeled the second, Community, Return if you can, and started carrying it like a portable chance to be decent. The first time I used it, a dad at the playground needed to call a ride for his mom, whose cane had decided to unionize against long walks. He plugged in, and his relief was as audible as birds. Another day, a tourist at the museum took photos with a phone resurrected for an hour. "You're my hero," she said, "because we use big words for small rescues we didn't expect." I laughed, the way heroes do, when they know they're just carrying extra electrons. There is a metaphor here about charge and community that doesn't need explaining. Some days, I'm a battery with only one blue dot left. Some days, I have all four and a cable that fits what someone else forgot. The woman in the cafe didn't give me a thing. She gave me a practice. I keep the pack in the pocket of my bag where my hand can find it without looking, along with the sentence I like to use when offering it. "I'll be here a while. Want some charge?" We talk about power in grand ways. Politics, institutions, history. Sometimes power is just a battery pack sliding across a cafe table, with enough charge to get someone through a meeting that might change their week. At 3%, manners matter. So does the person who collected adapters for no reason, except that someday a stranger would need one. Story 6. The porch with the blue chalk. Sometimes the map to belonging is drawn at knee height in chalk. I moved into a duplex with a porch big enough to hold a season. The first night, it felt like a stage waiting for a script. The second morning, I woke to a message written across the steps in blue chalk. "Welcome, porch friends," with a lopsided heart and 3 stars that looked like they'd been taught by a patient adult. I took coffee outside and sat on the step where the welcome curved. A girl on a scooter stopped like a punctuation mark. "Do you like it?" she asked, breathless with ownership. "Very much," I said. "I'm Mira," she announced, "and that's my brother Leo, and we live in the yellow house, and we have a cat who minds his own business." Leo waved with 2 fingers, an economy of greeting. "I'm new," I said, which felt like a confession and a password. "I saw," she said, as if this were a known fact, like the weather. Blue chalk multiplied. The next day, this step, good for reading, with an arrow pointing to a patch of shade. The next, if you sit here, you can see robins. True. A week later, please don't jump the steps like Liam did. Intriguing. The chalk was a bulletin board for a neighborhood that still believed in exclamation points. One afternoon, I left a reply in yellow. "What's your cat's name?" The following morning, "Sir." Of course it was. Sir appeared that evening and sat exactly 4 feet away, maintaining diplomatic relations. I offered respect and a saucer of water. He blinked permission. The porch began to do what porches do when given half a chance: hold people. Neighbors slid onto the top step with the kind of small talk that becomes big talk in good weather. We traded names and stories, the way people trade recipes they've made twice, with hope and caveats. A retired nurse taught me the right way to deadhead the mystery rosebush that had come with the lease. A college kid offered to carry my heavy plant up the steps and refused cookies as payment, which made me suspicious until he admitted he was gluten-free. I bought gluten-free cookies. He took one like a treaty. One Saturday, I found chalk drawings of hopscotch squares that ran from the sidewalk to the porch like a runway for good moods. A sign: "Hop if you want." Adults hopped with inefficient joy. Teenagers pretended not to want to, and then did. I hopped alone at dusk and felt something unglue inside me, in a productive way. Blue chalk had a rival in pink. Someone, Mira, I suspect, wrote "Story Night on Steps Friday 7th" and underlined it with commitment. I put out 6 cushions and an unreasonable number of citronella candles that tried and failed to negotiate with mosquitoes. At 7:05, kids arrived with flashlights that made the porch look like a spaceship. Adults came with folding chairs and camp cups. I read a book about a fox who keeps a list of small miracles. When I finished, Leo demanded another. We read The Fox again. No one complained. Afterward, an older neighbor named Tilda told us how the block had done this during the blackout, passing a lantern up and down the steps like a relay torch. "We saw stars," she said, offended that modern life has made that rare. We scheduled the next story night with the solemnity of a council. A few weeks later, the porch was a clinic. Kid elbows met concrete with the inevitability of gravity. I produced Band-Aids I'd suddenly started carrying like a parent. A bike chain sulked. A neighbor's toolkit saved it. A plant got adopted by committee. The chalk began to include practicalities. Garage sale, sat 9 to 12. Free herbs, take some, leave a note. If you see a blue scooter, it is mine, Mira. Blue chalk turned the block into a series of favors paid forward. Then came the day, inevitable, instructional, when an adult stepped wrong. A delivery driver misjudged the curb, a box tumbled, and a handmade pottery bowl shattered into a lesson. The driver looked stricken. Before apologies could eat the afternoon, Tilda appeared with her broom, Mira with a dustpan, and I with the porch's collective doctrine. Things are just things. People are the idea. We swept. Someone brought tape. Leo wrote in chalk, "It's okay, we have glue." It wasn't fixable. We gave the driver a glass of water anyway and sent him back into his route, lighter than he arrived. In late summer, we held a porch swap. Books, sweaters, a lamp with opinions. I watched a teenager trade a stack of YA novels for a potted basil, a dad negotiate his toddler's insistence that the broken radio was music waiting, and a shy neighbor light up when someone admired her painting and asked for lessons. I traded a stool that had tried to be a chair for a small wind chime that sings when the evening wants attention. When fall cooled the steps, the chalk took on urgency. Last ice pops appeared. Popsicles materialized with logic I did not question. School, soon, meh, made me laugh out loud alone. I added, Hot Chalk Friday, and placed a basket of packets that disappeared with the speed of joy. A mom confessed it had been a week. She took 2. I told her it had been a week for me, too. I took 3. The day I found, Please come to my day, sat 2, Mira 8, in large, hopeful letters. I asked her mom for details and permission to be charmed. We showed up with sidewalk chalk shaped like stars. 8-year-olds did not need encouragement to use it. The steps became a galaxy. We sang loudly, off-key, fearlessly. Sir the Cat tolerated hats for 1 full second and then resigned his post. Winter made the porch a memory we visited with caution. The chalk rested. We waved across scarves and nodded with eyebrows frozen into punctuation. In early spring, the first message reappeared like a crocus. Welcome back, porch friends. I made coffee for 2, and it turned into coffee for 6. Tilda brought a newspaper, and we argued gently about crossword clues no one could verify. The college kid, now newly employed, dropped off a bag of gluten-free cookies with a note that said, "For whoever needs a sugar win." The porch taught me to practice public softness, to write hate where the world can see it, to leave a note that says, "Borrow my hammer," to make a space where strangers remember their neighbors first. The blue chalk turned an address into a place, then a place into a habit, then a habit into a small culture. I have lived in taller buildings with fancier lobbies and felt lonelier. Now, When I move somewhere new, I will carry chalk. I will write, "Welcome, porch friends." On whatever counts as a step, I'll wait to see who answers. If no one does, I'll write HI again the next day, until someone does. Maps to belonging are not secrets. They're written in chalk at knee height, where anyone can read them. Story 7, The Quiet Corner on the Bus. Public transit is a moving room where kindness has to be quiet to fit. I ride the 42 bus. When I want to remember, I live among other humans. Teenagers practicing indifference, nurses soft as saints, a man who whistles hymns off-key, a woman who sells roses 2 stops a week. The 42 offers what cities promise and rarely deliver. 10 minutes where we all agree not to be the main character. On a Tuesday, the bus had the hum of a fridge. Reliable, a little tired. At stop 12, a girl climbed aboard wearing a backpack like a shell and headphones the size of a plan. She scanned the seats the way new animals scan a field. She chose the back corner and folded herself small. I noticed because she had the stiff shoulders of someone holding in a weather system. 2 stops later, a group of boys, with the logic of pack, joined, loud in a way that covers fear. They settled in near her, not cruel, just big. One started a beat on the metal rim of the window. Another layered a joke. The third added a comment that made the bus choose to hear or not. The girl shrank further, eyes on a point no one else could see. Without discussing it, the bus rearranged itself. The rose seller slid 3 rows back and took the seat across from the girl, as if she'd been headed there all along. She did not speak. She pulled a book from her bag and began to read, with the kind of concentration that is contagious. A man in a hard hat moved up 1 row, aisle seat, making a line of quiet bodies between the boys and the girl. I shifted to the seat in front of her and became a wall that could apologize if needed. The driver caught our choreography in her mirror. Bus drivers know everything. She adjusted nothing. She kept time with the road like a metronome for decency. The beat on the window continued, but softer. Jokes turned inward, less performative. The girl's shoulders lowered 1 vertebra's worth. The rose seller turned a page. The man in the hard hat closed his eyes the way people do when they are building a room no one else can see. I stared at the advertisements for dental plans as if they were art. At stop 17, the boys tumbled out with the chaos of gravity. The bus exhaled. The girl kept her smallness. The rose seller, without lifting her eyes from the page, slid a wrapped rose across the aisle and set it on the empty seat beside the girl. No spectacle. The girl didn't touch it. She stared at it as if it might be a test. The driver called, "Corner of Laurel in 2," and the bus prepared itself. The girl tucked the rose into her backpack's side pocket with the ceremony of a treaty. As she passed the front to exit, she whispered, not quite to the driver, not quite to the bus, "Thanks." The driver nodded like a priest. The doors hissed, and she was gone. The rose seller returned to hawking roses, with 0 mention of the one missing from her inventory. The man in the hard hat woke fully and asked the driver if the detour on Thursdays was still a thing. It was. I got off 2 stops later and felt like I had witnessed a vigil performed without candles. I think about that corner on days I've had to be the quiet body between someone and someone else. It is not heroic. It's a geometry problem solved with humans. Sometimes the answer is simply, sit here. Sometimes it is be less loud. Often it is hand someone a rose without making them owe you a story. The 42 keeps teaching me that kindness on transit must be scaled to fit. Small gestures, quick decisions, exits that don't glance back to collect gratitude. When I buy a rose, now I say, for the quiet corner, and the seller nods like we share a union. Story 8. The note under the door. Apologies travel badly by text. Paper still knows the route. The argument with my downstairs neighbor had been about the loudest quiet thing. Footsteps. I'd moved furniture at 9 p.m. because ambition sometimes ignores ceilings. He'd banged on his with a broom handle, and a sentence had fallen out of my mouth I didn't admire. We went to bed 2 floors apart, both righteous and slightly sick. Morning brought better weather in my head. I tried composing a text that would not read like a hostage note. Everything I typed sounded like a committee had written it. I remembered a piece of advice from a friend who believes in analog. If you can't say it well out loud, write it by hand and let the ink carry your throat. I took a blank card from the drawer that pretends to be organized and started. Hi, Sam, I wrote, startled to use his name instead of downstairs. I'm sorry for the noise and for my words. You were right about time. I forgot we share floors the way people share walls. I'd like to make a better plan. I slid the note under his door and immediately regretted the permanence. 10 minutes later, a piece of paper slid back under mine, like a diplomatic pouch. Hi, upstairs, it began. I was a jerk with my broom. I work early and my head was loud. Coffee? He added a time and a smiley face that looked like it had balanced on a pencil socket for the effort. We met on the stoop with travel mugs, neutral territory. Sam was younger than I'd made him in my head, and less certain about everything than his midnight broom had implied. We didn't relitigate. We made logistics, quiet hours, a text first before banging rule, a shared calendar for my occasional furniture optimism. He told me he plays bass badly. I told him I burn toast loudly. We shook on it like ambassadors with dirty sneakers. 2 weeks later, a package arrived for me while I was away. Sam texted, "Got a box for you? Heavy. We'll leave it inside your door." I came home to find it neatly tucked, plus a small note taped on top. P.S. Your doormat lies. There is not, in fact, wine. I left a bottle on his stoop with a card that said, "Now it doesn't." The stairs felt cooperative. Months rolled. The upstairs neighbor I had created in my head, oblivious, probably smug, was replaced by Sam, who loans me his drill and likes documentaries where experts explain their weirdo bug. When his father visited, I carried up a third chair. When my niece did, he warned me about the raccoon with leadership qualities near the trash. We're not friends, exactly. We're better, neighbors with a treaty. The night the fire alarm in the hallway chirped, that little chirp of doom every 30 seconds, we teamed up instinctively. He produced a step stool. I produced fresh batteries. A third neighbor produced a willingness to laugh at our incompetence. We silenced the hallway and went back to our lives a little more in the black with each other. I kept the original note in the drawer. Proof that paper can go where text cannot. When friends complain about their own upstairs people, I don't play both sidesism. Sometimes noise is trespass, but I do suggest ink. It slows you down enough to see yourself the way someone else might. It leaves room for a reply that can slide gently under a door when both of you are ready to be better. Apologies travel badly by text. They travel fine on paper, tucked into the day with humility. And sometimes the person at the other end replies not with a verdict, but with coffee, which is, in its way, a blueprint for living near other humans. Story 9. The Freezer Queen. Some people rule with crowns, some with neatly labeled casseroles. When my friend Jess had her baby, our group chat became a logistics app with jokes. People signed up to bring food and forgot I am people. Then Nora, from across the hall, stepped in like a general who prefers aprons to medals. I do freezers, she said, and in 3 days became the monarch of our building's postpartum pantry. Nora's system could have taught a business class. She posted a sign-up with specificity, single-serve portions, reheat instructions, allergen notes, date. Label your container like you want it back or don't. She taped a color code on Jess's freezer like a legend. Green for breakfasts, blue for mains, yellow for snacks, pink for treats that double as bribes. She added a bin marked middle of the night. It filled with items that could be opened with one hand, while the other rocked a person. I made a pan of lasagna that tried to be helpful and failed spatially. Nora saw its ambition and repackaged it into squares, parchment between, labels like tiny love letters. Think of your future self at 3 a.m., she said, which turned out to be a sentence about everything. Jess cried when she saw the freezer. Somebody loves me, she said. Many somebodies, Nora corrected, and we're bossed around by me. The freezer worked beyond food. Its existence said you don't have to ask. When Jess's partner forgot to buy more burp cloths, the freezer held a note with a QR code to a shared list that someone else had already ordered. When a neighbor's mom wanted to help but lived 2 states away, we added her to the budget for restocking. When Jess had a day that introduced her to the concept of cluster feeding, the freezer offered a smoothie labeled, "Drink even if you think you're fine." Weeks later, Nora ran a refresher. Check dates, rotate stock, rescue the thing that wants to be eaten. She taught us the art of the freezer rummage, how to turn it into a treasure hunt rather than an archaeological dig. She wrote, with forbidding cheer, "No unlabeled soups." We obeyed. The freezer became a meeting point. People dropping off food lingered long enough to carry out recycling, to hold the baby so Jess could shower, to laugh at the way parenthood dismantles and rebuilds you on a loop. Nora kept a whiteboard on the door titled, "You Did It," where visitors could write achievements that would not impress the wider world, but impressed us. Trimmed baby's nails without crying. Me, not baby. Slept 3 HRs in a row. Remembered what day it is, briefly. The board filled like a slow parade. When Jess returned to work, the freezer changed missions. Nora updated the legend. Green, and grab-and-go lunches. Blue, dinners that tolerate being reheated at 10 p.m. Pink, morale. We cooked more vegetables. We learned Jess's baby now ate sweet potatoes with the seriousness of a tiny food critic. I made muffins and labeled them, 2 as a serving if you're honest. No one argued. At the building holiday party, someone brought Nora a paper crown. She wore it for exactly 12 minutes, then placed it on the freezer with a magnet. "The crown belongs to the system," she declared. We toasted with something bubbly and practical. Jess held her now chubby baby, who gnawed a wooden spoon and looked at all of us like staff. Now, whenever a neighbor hits a rough patch, surgery, grief, finals week, I hear Nora's voice in my head. I do freezers. I keep my freezer with one shelf labeled others. A couple of soups, a spare lasagna, cookies packed by 2s. It's a tiny monarchy anyone can join. We rule by making tomorrow at 3 a.m. a little less impossible. Story 10. The park bench appointment. Some calendars are written in pen, some in weather, in a wooden slat with your name on it. There's a bench in the park near the pond, where geese pretend they are diplomats. It's at the right angle for evening light and wrong angle for any practical form of shade. 2 springs ago, I sat there on a Sunday because the day had not delivered anything I could name. Across the slat, carved carefully, with something sharper than a key, but kinder than a knife. Stay. It felt like advice and a dare. An old man in a cap sat at the far end with the carefulness of someone lowering a fragile day. We did the acknowledgement dance. After a while, he said, "Mondays are for ducks," as if it were a ritual rather than a sentence. "What are Sundays for?" I asked. "Regret," he said, then softened. "And sometimes chess." He opened a travel set and placed it between us. "I'm terrible," I confessed. "Excellent," he said. "Then you'll win." We played the kind of game that is less about pieces and more about giving time a job. He told me his late wife thought chess should be a team sport. I told him I eat cereal for dinner when I'm tired of my own ambition. He beat me with a knight that behaved like mischief. We agreed to meet next week. Same bench, same hour. It felt like making an appointment with hope. We kept it. Not every week, because weather and errands and mortality are what they are, but often enough that the bench began to feel like a co-conspirator. We became friends, the way adults rarely do, by scheduling it and showing up. He was Henry. I was the person who kept forgetting rooks exist until they ate my afternoon. We brought thermoses. We learned the geese had factions. We watched a family of turtles sun themselves like small, precise loaves. Others began to treat our bench like a room with the door politely ajar. A runner stretched near us and offered unsolicited advice on hip flexors that we took because he had good calves. A teen sat on the end some days and pretended not to watch, then asked us to teach her the moves when she realized we would not make a curriculum of it. She beat me in 3 weeks and started bringing homework she ignored in favor of asking Henry about the old city maps he remembered better than Google. One evening, a woman sat down, looking exactly like a person at the end of a biography, the way people do when they are more tired than their bodies can explain. We didn't ask. We played. After 10 minutes, Henry slid a pawn to the edge, promoted it to a queen, and said, without drama, "We can promise you this, the board resets. Not because you deserve it, because that's the deal." The woman nodded and cried a bit behind sunglasses that were not doing their job. She left after a while and said, "Thank you for being furniture that talks." We told her we were there Sundays if she needed furniture again. The bench gave us small seasons. Summer brought a brass band that rehearsed nearby. We played to a soundtrack that made rook moves feel cinematic. Fall threw leaves at our strategy. Winter narrowed the appointments, but made them more precious. We once played wearing gloves and laughed at our clumsy kings. Spring returned, smug and correct. One Sunday, I arrived to find Henry's cap on the bench, unmanned, a note tucked beneath. Hospital. Not dramatic. Back soon. H. I sat and felt the way a piece feels when it loses its square. I wrote back, "I saved your seat." The geese voted 3-2 to allow. I went every Sunday that month and played both sides badly, leaving him the losing side because it would please him. When he returned, thinner, gentler, still funny, he said, "I heard you kept the appointments." "The bench insisted," I said. We resumed. He told me how the hospital hummed like a late-night laundromat. I told him about work and the way a project had moved from please like me to please work. He taught the teen to castle at speed. She taught him the slang for excellent, which changes weekly, and we did not keep up with. We carried on. When Henry died the following winter, a fact that arrived in a phone call from his nephew, because he had planned how strangers would be notified, I went to the bench on Sunday at our hour and found a small group gathered. The teen, the runner with the persuasive calves, the woman who had once needed furniture. We sat like people attending a tiny outdoor church. We played a game in which Henry's side won by fiat. We told the pond and the geese and the wooden slats everything we loved about a man who believed, against reasonable evidence, that pawns should be treated like poetry. The nephew later installed a small plaque with Henry's name and the words he had chosen. Keep your appointment. The bench looks smug now. Good. It earned it. I keep the appointment still. Some Sundays, not all. Sometimes with a friend, sometimes alone, sometimes with a stranger who sits down and says, "Do you play?" We do. We reset the board because that's the deal. We watch the geese argue policy. We pretend the brass band is on our payroll. We carry Henry forward, one pawn at a time. Some calendars are written in pen. Some are written in the commitment to show up to a wooden slat by a pond, because a man in a cap once said, "Mondays are for ducks and Sundays for chess," and he wasn't entirely wrong. The bench holds the time. We bring the pieces. And when I pass that spot on other days, I read the word carved into the wood. Stay and try, in the ways that count, to obey.